and you're going to have to tell us how to pronounce the.
CISA. I prefer
It is CISA, okay, because there's been different versions going around.
We
Okay.
follow the defense approach of DISA.
Okay.
We're just one letter earlier in the alphabet.
All right. Well, I'm going to make my opening statements brief this afternoon in order to maximize time for questions. Director Krebs, congratulations on being named the first director of the Department of Homeland Security's Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency. We've spoken about some of the challenges that you and CISA face, and I want to reaffirm my commitment to helping you address those challenges. As you know, election security has been a major focus of this subcommittee. For the second year in a row, we have supported significant increases to your budget to address the vulnerabilities to ensure our election system is secure and reliable. Director Krebs, thank you again for being here, and I would now like to turn to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Ranking Member Fleischman, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I appreciate those remarks. Director Krebs, thank you for being here today, and appreciate your visiting our office, and congratulations on being the very first. That's outstanding for this very important agency. Director Krebs, the importance of our government cybersecurity cannot be underestimated. So much of what we do is through networks, from getting $20 from an ATM to our military weapon system. Our society today is dependent on safe and secure networks. Further, the principle of fair and accurate election voting is paramount to our democracy. Because of this, we need to be ever vigilant to protect our critical infrastructure from foreign nations and criminals who seek to undermine our economy and government. As you know, the Oak Ridge National Lab is in my district in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. While Oak Ridge is sponsored by the Department of Energy, it partners with a number of federal agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security, to conduct high-level research in many of these areas. I'll have a few questions later in my rounds about CISA and how it works with Oak Ridge. I think the good work you do combined with the good work at Oak Ridge does is a great value for the taxpayer's dollar. Plus, we can best bring safeguards to our nation and its critical infrastructure working together. I look forward today to your testimony and to the questions from my colleagues as we hear from you about your initiatives. Thank you, and I yield back.
First, for some housekeeping issues, as in other subcommittee hearings, members will be called based on their seniority and those who were present when the hearing started. I also would ask that every member stick to the 5-minute time they are allotted to allow everyone to have time to ask their questions. Also, my understanding is there is a problem with the microphones, and so make sure that you have them on and that you're speaking.
Thank you, Chairwoman Robella Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. This hearing is timely as I recently announced 5 operational mission priorities for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency over the next 2 years. 2 of those priorities, federal network security and election security, we'll discuss today. In both federal network security and election security, agencies, whether federal, state, or local, are responsible for the security of their networks. CISA's job is to make their job easier as they manage their risk. In this sense, we are the nation's risk advisor. We work to understand risk, share our understanding with those that can best manage that risk, and provide targeted support to help them manage their risk. On federal network security, our approach is threefold. First, we define for agencies what secure is. Second, we provide tools and technical assistance to agencies to better secure themselves. And third, when needed or appropriate, we act to intervene to ensure secure and resilient systems. In all, this is a particularly challenging undertaking, and there is room left for improvement. In a number of areas, including establishing and enforcing a security baseline across the government, analyzing the data we have and collect, and accounting for new technologies like cloud and mobile. And yet, there's no question the cybersecurity of federal networks is stronger than it was just 4 years ago. Through our approach, our understanding of what's happening across networks is improving. IT capabilities government-wide are on a path to prioritization and standardization, and leadership awareness at the cabinet level is increasing, leading to better accountability and more consistent implementation of policy and guidance. I'd like to briefly highlight a few areas of measurable progress. Through our continuous diagnostics and mitigation program, we are protecting over 3 million assets across the federal civilian enterprise. Before 2016, there was no over-the-top understanding of how many devices were even out there. Through our intrusion prevention system that uses classified signatures, from 2016 to July 17, we stopped 13 campaigns launched by 16 different advanced actors. Through a binding operational directive we issued in 2015, we reduced the time agencies were taking to patch critical vulnerabilities from an average of 219 days to today's average of around 20 days. In many cases, this is better than industry. In 2017, we issued a binding operational directive to require the removal of Kaspersky antivirus products from federal networks. And finally, through a binding operational directive in 2018, we've enforced stronger email and web security standards, with the federal government leading all industry sectors in deploying DMARC to stop email-based phishing attacks. We've made our directives public and available for the network defense community. Just recently, we issued an emergency directive to protect federal networks from a global campaign tampering with what is essentially the Internet's phone book. We heard back from numerous stakeholders outside of the federal government, including a large metropolitan chief information security officer, that they followed our guidance, but did not have to, and yet they did. Cyber threats also pose a growing risk to our nation's critical infrastructure. Perhaps the highest profile threat we face today are attempts by nation-state actors to interfere in our democratic elections. Ahead of the 2018 midterms, we surged our efforts, and over 550 CISA employees throughout the agency worked with all 50 states and over 1,400 local and territorial election offices to raise awareness of the threat, provide free technical cybersecurity assistance, share threat and mitigation information, and otherwise empower state and local election officials to secure their systems. Our efforts to Protect 2020 are already underway. Protect 2020 will focus on broadening the reach and depth of assistance to state and local election officials and their private sector partners, emphasizing the criticality of election auditability, prioritizing the need to patch election systems, and developing state and locality-specific cybersecurity profiles that officials can use to manage risk. In closing, I would like to thank the committee for its continued support of CISA and our mission. The additional $33 million provided in FY19 for election security helps ensure that election security is here to stay at CISA. Additional resources provided over the years for our federal cybersecurity programs have helped raise the baseline of cybersecurity across the federal enterprise and have mitigated countless threats to federal networks and critical infrastructure. We at CISA are committed to working with Congress to ensure our efforts cultivate a safer, more secure, and resilient homeland. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Director Krebs, in FY 2018, Congress provided an additional $26 million for election security efforts by the National Protection and Programs Directorate, which is now the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Congress also provided $380 million to the Election Assistance Commission to help secure elections through grants to states. In the FY 2019 appropriation, we provided $33 million to CISA to continue and expand its efforts. How did CISA use its FY18 funds, and did you see a significant improvement in state election security efforts compared to the 2016 election? And to what extent was CISA able to coordinate with the Election Assistance Commission to to better leverage the use of its grant funding?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I've said it before, and it was an initial earlier draft of my opening statement, but I've said that 2018 was the most secure election held in the modern era here in the United States. What we did with that $26.2 million in 2018 was help broaden and build additional capacity within the agency. What I mean by that is additional risk and vulnerability assessments. So the actual technical services that are free, voluntary, and confidential provided to state and local officials. So we provide those services that prior to 16 had never happened. So let me give you a metric or example of why things were different in 18 compared to 16. In 2018, we had deployed network intrusion detection sensors, and those are things that look for communication with malicious internet infrastructure. So for 2018, we had deployed sensors that covered about 90 to 92% of state and local networks that managed the voting process, 92%. Prior to 2016, it was about 32%. That is a significant improvement based on Congress's recognition of our role and empowering us with part of the 26.2. We were also able to conduct a number of exercises. In fact, we had an exercise last August with 44 states in the District of Columbia. It was a 3-day exercise. Had never been done before. You had a hearing with FEMA yesterday. They do a exercise every year called the Great Shakeout, an earthquake-focused exercise. We're going to take the same approach every year, whether it's a presidential, a midterm, or off-cycle. We'll do an election security exercise every single year to help support our state and local partners. For the upcoming year of 2020, we will continue to build our capacity, continue to build the services needed to support state and local governments. In terms of the Election Assistance Commission, that $380 million, we used some of the free services we provide through which we were able to develop an understanding of what the real weaknesses in state and local systems are. And we use that to develop with our partners in the state and local government guidance to help inform how they're spending that $380 million.
In May of last year, the administration published a federal cybersecurity risk determination report and action plan. And the report stated that 71 of the 96 agencies, or 74%, that participated in the risk assessment process have cybersecurity programs that are either at risk or high risk. And this strikes me to be pretty alarming. And so the GAO noted in the December 2018 report that they have considered federal information security to be a government-wide high-risk area since 1997. So we've been working on these issues for at least 22 years, and yet it seems that our adversaries continue to outpace us in our efforts to secure our agencies' networks. In fact, as you noted in your testimony, just this past January, you issued the first emergency directive to federal civilian agencies because of another known cybersecurity threat. Can you provide more context about what the current federal cybersecurity risks are and what kind of damage can this cause to federal government operations and to the public?
Yes, ma'am. So my sense of things is that federal networks will always be a high-risk space because the level of threat that we see in the cybersecurity space. The emergency directive is a great example of something that we frankly, there was, as I mentioned in my opening, basically tampering with the Internet's phone book, is a simple way to put it, but it's not something that we had monitored for, that we were actually tracking because we hadn't seen it happen at scale. As soon as we realized it was happening, we were able to implement services and a set of recommendations to harden infrastructure and improve monitoring. Again, things are better than they were in 2016. So we are tracking a series of metrics of improvement. They're not measurements or metrics for success, because it's really hard to measure success in cybersecurity. Even the the highest speed organizations have difficulty with that. But we have demonstrable improvement in terms of the systems we're providing. The thing we're focusing on right now is getting systems more secure by design and by deployment. So as I look to the work that Congress has done on IT modernization and that the administration has done on IT modernization, that is an opportunity for us to make common investments to ensure that the next iteration of what federal networks look like are more secure, so we're not doing security by bolt-on.
Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director Krebs, thank you again, sir. As I mentioned, I represent the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which includes a cybersecurity division. As I understand it, this division does a lot of work with DHS S&T's Transition to Practice program. A core part of this mission is to bridge the gap between research and the private sector, which requires a transition process that allows for technology to mature and partnerships with the marketplace to form. Through TTP, DHS S&T is leading the successful transition of federally funded cybersecurity technologies into broader use through commercialization and adoption by end users. The TTP program has three main goals: identify promising technologies that address an existing or imminent cybersecurity need that impacts national security, increase utilization through partnerships, product development efforts, and commercialization, and finally, sir, to improve the long-term ability of federal government research organizations to transition technology more efficiently. My first question, sir, is what is the relationship between CISA and DHS S&T?
Yes, sir. So I have actually a very close working relationship with the senior official performing the duties of the undersecretary, which is a title I used to hold, Bill Bryan over at S&T. And through his revitalization process at S&T, we've shifted to a much closer alignment between what my requirements are as a network defender, a support element for network defenders, and their actual research and development program. So seeing much tighter alignment between what they go out and solicit for and what my requirements are. I have a small R&D budget, relatively speaking, on the order of, I want to say somewhere in the neighborhood of $4.5 million. The cyber research and development budget at S&T is much, much larger. So again, we have to make sure that we're aligning and not just going off and doing good idea projects. One of the areas of interest, including working with Oak Ridge, is the Silicon Valley Innovation Program that S&T has. It was just out in San Francisco last week and the week before and met with their folks. They have very good relationships with those innovators and the venture capital companies out in the valley that we can really tap into to get ahead of the next threat.
Yes, sir. As a follow-up to that question, how is CISA working in coordination with DHS S&T to leverage and deploy new technologies into the marketplace?
So in part through the TTP process that you've mentioned, it's identifying our requirements. What are the things we've identified that may be useful across federal networks, but also soliciting input from the critical infrastructure community and help sorting out what the opportunities are for research with S&T.
Okay. How is DHS, whether CISA or S&T or other elements, are leveraging the new cyber technologies coming out of our universities and national labs to protect our election cyber systems, sir?
So on the specific to elections, we work with NIST, but primarily the Election Assistance Commission. It has that core election relationship with the community, again, providing technology assistance or security assistance to those stakeholders. One of the things that we just recently completed with one of our national labs is as they were developing a technology, we brought it into our lab and we worked with them on basically red teaming, or really breaking down the equipment and finding out through the design process what the vulnerabilities might be, so that they can, when they deliver a product, it is secure by design.
Yes, sir. One final question. What new technologies are being used to defend and monitor our U.S. election systems for cyber intrusions or manipulations, sir?
So I touched briefly on the sensors that we've deployed, that DHS has deployed. But I do want to step back a little bit on election security. As we go out there and get a better sense of what election offices and jurisdictions and the systems they've deployed look like, we are reinforcing the basics of patching, multi-factor authentication, training to spot what a phishing email looks like. It's really just focusing on the basics. Sometimes a lot of the infrastructure, even within the federal government, isn't mature enough to accept some of these new technologies that are coming out. So while we continue to look for security, new technology and security opportunities, it's really hitting the basics hard, and that's going to be one of our focuses for protecting 2020.
Thank you, Director Krebs, and Madam Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Director, thank you. Let me ask you about elections. I was the Secretary of State for the state of Texas, so I got familiar with elections. And as you know, there's a couple things. One is when you look at the election infrastructure, it covers so many things, whether it's ICT, capabilities, fiscal assets, technologies, for the registration or the validation, the casting, the transmission, the tabulation, the reporting of votes, the certification, the auditing, the verification of election. It's a series of things that you have to go through, and there's always opportunities in the different steps. Then on top of that, you got, for example, Texas has 254 counties, and that's only the state of Texas. So how are you helping all 50 states? Thank you. All 50 states, and then how do you go down to, especially the small rural counties that say, oh, nothing's going to happen here? How are y'all doing that type of outreach? I mean, is there a systematic way of doing this?
Yes, sir, there is. So when we step back and look at it, there are about 8,800. I think the number changes. In some states there's up to 1,800 jurisdictions, voting jurisdictions in the states. So we have to kind of look at this in a one-to-many approach. And so what we do is work with secretaries of state like you used to be to reach out and down into the jurisdictions within each state. So we last year at the end, in the run-up to 2018, we developed it was called the Last Mile Initiative. And basically it was a poster that went to each jurisdiction and participating states. I think at this point we have 33 participating states, but we knocked out 19 states in the run-up to 2018. And that's the states that wanted to do it. We got through 19. And that is, it's awareness building. So it's here are the threats, here are the potential risks in the election process. It really is, like you said, a system of systems. Here are the things you can do to address and mitigate those risks. And then here are the resources available from the federal government, including signing up for the multi-state or the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, to sign up for a cyber hygiene scan, to participate in an exercise. So it's really, first and foremost, it's increasing awareness and then bringing them into some of the free voluntary services that we provide.
So do you have an idea? You said 88?
It's about 8,800, and in the run-up to 2018, we were able to work with 1,400 of them. And our goal, our top priority for 2020 is extending and broadening that reach.
So 8,800, you've covered 1,400.
Yes, sir.
So how do you reach the rest?
Persistence.
Yeah.
Persistence. Yes, sir. It's, again, we started from a common denominator pretty much of zero. In 2016, there was no relationship between the Department of Homeland Security and state or local election officials. So we were starting from scratch. Last February, we, working with the election community, established the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the ISAC. And at that point, I believe it's about 1,500 local members in all 50 states. That, over the period of time that developed, that's the fastest growing ISAC of any other sector. So there's progress, there's commitment, but this doesn't happen overnight. And the one thing that I've found that is most critical and you can't buy it, is trust. So we have had to put an enormous amount of boots on the ground time out across the United States to meet, to work, to do exercises, to have a cup of coffee, and just get to know these folks and let them know who we are and what we do. And then we're not here to take over elections. We're here to make sure that their elections go smoothly, go safely, and go securely.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Director
Thanks, sir.
Krebs. Appreciate you being here. You made the statement that 2018 was our most secure election so far. And that's a great statement to be able to make. So thank you for your efforts to make that happen.
Excuse me, Dan, they're having trouble hearing us, so we're going to have to
How's this?
a little bit and get closer to the
So
microphone.
eat the
Thank you.
microphone. So appreciate your efforts to make our elections most secure. I think the American public really wants that, appreciates the government's effort to do that. And so just a couple of questions surrounding that. You've been, with Mr. Cuellar's line of questioning, touching on a lot of that as some of the others too. But you made points, I think you laid out 3 general things that you're going to do to work on for 2020. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to expound on that. So we'll be able to come back in 2 years and say that 2020 was the most secure election we've ever had. And then also, as we talked about before the meeting started, the whole subject of security clearances, is that impeding agencies' work, your work, and is there anything that we can do to help in the whole area of making sure that clearances are provided to the right individuals for the right levels? So just a couple areas there.
So on priorities for 2020, I created a new hashtag last week at a conference out in San Francisco. We're calling it Protect 2020. I mentioned in my opening. Yeah. We have 3 primary areas of focus. One is increasing that reach, getting as close to 8,800 as we can possibly get by 2020. The second one is really getting to the bottom of where is the risk in the system of systems that is elections. Part of that, though, is understanding that we still need to really focus on the basics. And so that's why we're prioritizing organizations, really improving patch management. You still find that some systems out there are either legacy or old systems that haven't been patched recently and are still open vulnerability. And as we increase that reach, as we increase this understanding of where the risk is, we are also going to develop and have already developed tools that we can drop on top to say, hey, I'm working with you now. We understand what your risk is. I have this capability. I can scan the internet-facing systems of any organization. We require it across federal government, but I can do it with state and locals and tell them, hey, that you haven't patched that system and that's out touching the public internet. That's probably vulnerable and might be a good way for a bad guy to get inside. So you may want to take care of that. And the third piece is once we get an understanding of where the real risk is, informing the conversation on the Hill and state capitals on the resources, whether it's people, equipment, funding, whatever, of what it's going to take to get these systems to where they want to go. That is probably the biggest policy conversation ahead of us, is what is it going to take to get these systems where they need to be and who's going to pay for it. On the security clearances piece, the process, security clearances has always been a bit of that albatross over the federal government. It takes a little too long for the highest level of clearances. I think it's in the 17-month period. Fortunately, the Department of Defense is prioritizing and focusing on that. I have all the confidence in the world that they will be able to knock down those wait times. But at the same time, we can do things to make our lives easier. We can declassify and we can stop overclassifying. So I have certain authorities that I can read people in and give them short-term clearances. I also have declassification authorities in certain spaces. So we need to be looking at this problem from both ends. I do have the ability and actually the honor of sponsoring a program called the Private Sector Clearance Program, where from across the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, I can sponsor clearances for network defenders and other security officers. And that's something we take very seriously, and we're looking to streamline that process as much as possible. But again, keeping in mind that you know, having a security clearance isn't a silver bullet, and there's not necessarily a treasure trove of information on the other side of that wall.
Mm-hmm. Keeping in mind that we don't want to compromise any
Absolutely.
system
Yes, sir.
in place. And one of the difficulties I would imagine is with the election system, you've got 50 different systems out there, right?
Well, at least. The Congressman Cuellar mentioned that you know, Texas 283 is a bottom-up state, home rule, all that. So you're having purchasing decisions happening at individual county levels that further complicates it.
Yeah.
But back to the class clearance piece real quick. A lot of what makes information classified, particularly at that much higher level, network defenders don't need. They don't need the sources and methods. They really want to know the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures against which they can defend themselves.
Good. Well, again, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll yield back.
Okay. Mr. Price?
Thank you. Welcome. Glad to have you before us. Appreciate your testimony. I want to ask you to elaborate a bit more on your staffing successes, and I'm referring here, of course, to the IG report last month that indicates staffing has been a hindrance, and that to secure our election infrastructure, we need to pay attention to that. I know you are paying attention to it, but I wonder what kind of progress you can report between department leadership changes and a prolonged management vacancy at CISA and insufficient resources. The Inspector General has reported that DHS's efforts to complete its election infrastructure planning have been delayed. Inspector General also found that CISA did not have enough dedicated election infrastructure staff, and that you've not clearly delineated the roles, responsibilities, and procedure that the staff should have. I'm sure you're familiar with this. As many have said, we're quickly approaching the 2020 election season. It's critical to ensure that our infrastructure for these purposes is properly supported. So, a couple of questions. What steps are you taking, have you taken, to hire more dedicated election infrastructure staff and to finalize a detailed strategy in advance of the 2020 election cycle? And of course, are there ways that we can or should assist you in achieving the staffing goals?
Yes, sir. Thank you. As I mentioned in my opening, in 2018, in the run-up at over the course of, let's say, a month or so, we had over 550 employees within the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency working election issues. Was that every single day? No, because we are not election administrators. We are not election experts. State and locals aren't looking to me to help them understand how to run a better election. What they're looking to me for is cybersecurity advice and physical security advice. And so when I talk about dedicated election staff, when we started in 16, when we stood up our program for election infrastructure, we had 0 election infrastructure specialists. We established a task force that brought in detailees from across in some cases the administration, but primarily the Department of Homeland Security. And then over time, as we were running up and surging into the election, I was also building institutional capacity so that I don't have to have a task force. I have a sustainable program. We made a series of strategic hires. We are still making strategic hires. I actually hired someone off the Election Assistance Commission who is a renowned election security expert. We just recently brought in, through a support mechanism, through a contract, a local election security expert. So we're building that core that sits here in the National Capital Region that, more than anything, they're kind of air traffic controllers for getting security resources out to state and local governments. Again, I've got over 200 people in the field at any given moment, and I can bring that number up and down based on what the threat is. But at any given point, I've got somebody out there in the field doing elections, and that will only increase. That will only surge as we run up to the election to the 2020. reinforcing the importance of this mission at DHS, at CISA, through appropriations. $59 million between 18 and 19 is huge because I am building capacity that is here to stay, that is sustainable. In addition, that is building capacity that can go shift to other threats as they emerge, whether it's the grid, whether it's another industrial control systems issue. We're building depth. The highlight for me, beyond the fact that it was the most secure election in modern era, is that I used elections to better coordinate across the interagency with the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. So not just are we better for elections, we're better for every other critical infrastructure sector.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's hard for someone in our position to assess this simply because we're not certain what standard you or the IG is measuring staff adequacy against. So maybe I could just focus it, as my time is running out here, focus it a little more on your assessment of that report. I mean, do you accept the implied benchmarks that the IG was using, the implied staffing levels that would be optimal, or do you differ from that? And either way, are you what remains to be done as far as you're concerned?
I think I think there may be some differences in management style and how to execute in a highly dynamic threat environment. I am not focused necessarily on building static staff. I'm focused on building broader capacity that as the threat environment shifts, I can bring to bear all the resources necessary. So I think we did a pretty darn good job in the 2018 election. I think the results prove it. I think our stakeholders would support that, and we are only going to continue our approach as we go forward into 2020.
Mr. Rutherford?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. It seems like in this cyber world, if we look at the attacks on systems, private industry and others, I'm curious how much self-defense, if I'll call it that, how much self-defense are businesses allowed as far as responding to and attacking those who are attacking them? Or is it always just blocking? Are we never punching back? And who makes that decision?
So while I may have legal training, I'm not necessarily an expert in the CFAA, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and some of the other legal pieces. What we focus on is network defense, the blue team side. And so, in some cases it could be perceived as taking punches, but it's hardening the things we know they're going after. So,
but do we ever respond to those sources that are attacking us?
That is
by trying to take them out.
That is the domain of the Department of Defense, and I'm sure in a different setting they'd probably be happy to talk about those issues. But we are purely on the defense side, and sometimes I kind of liken us to the Geek Squad or whatever. We are there to help those that own the networks, that own the infrastructure, be better.
Okay. And so
there is certainly a role for levying consequences, though, against foreign adversaries, and that is, again, I mentioned the Department of Defense. There are a range of tools. There are sanctions, indictments, other diplomatic actions. There are a range of tools, but CISA, we're purely on the
you're not focused on that
the network defense side.
Okay. So is there, as you've gone through a great 2018 cycle, and you're looking at different election software, hardware, is there a list that CISA is saying, this stuff really works well, hey guys, don't use this again, it doesn't work well? Is there an evaluation system that you're making available to the different states and localities?
So under the Help America Vote Act from the last decade, the Election Assistance Commission is responsible for working with with NIST and other organizations to develop they have a certification process. And this is the equipment that EAC is certified. Each state legislature, and in some cases local, under Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution, is then responsible for administering the elections. Each state has their own process for how they use that certification list, how they do testing. It's every state's a little bit different.
You put it out there for them, though.
Yes, sir. And so we do work with EAC and NIST on providing technical expertise. Right. One of the areas that we're focusing on right now is as equipment is being developed, because new equipment's always in the development process, working with vendors to help them, again, secure their equipment by design.
I can't tell if I have any time left. In the other 16 categories, energy, I guess, is one, I'm sure. How are we doing in those fields as well? Have you seen a lot of tremendous improvement here in the last couple of years? Since this is kind of starting to pull everything together, it seems like?
So I think every year there's increased awareness of the threat. Just I mentioned last week I was at a conference in San Francisco. It's the largest cybersecurity conference in the world. The general feel, the sense is that things are a little bit better, primarily because of the decision makers, the executives, the people that own the risk, that manage the risk, the CEOs, the governors, the boards, the general counsels. They are highly attuned to what the threat is and what their risk is, and so they are focusing resources to address the risk. But the basics are still hard. Configuring systems the right way, patch management, enabling multi-factor authentication. The basics are still hard to do, and we are going to keep hammering on the need to do the basics until the basics get done, and then we'll move on to the hard stuff.
2.5, 3 years ago, we were, I think, really behind the curve. How much progress, say on a, how much better do you think we are now than we were 3 years ago?
So I mentioned in my opening that federal. I like using the federal networks as a good baseline because I can actually really measure that quite well. Prior to 2015, the average time to patch a critical vulnerability was something on the order of 219 days. Now it's averaging about 20 days, and I bet we can probably do better than that too. That's dramatic improvement. That's dramatic, and if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So we're continuing to look for what those indicators of improvement are.
Yeah. Well, you guys keep up the great work. I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you, sir.
Now yield back, Madam Chair.
Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Director. I know what it's like on this side of the table now. This isn't. You're doing well here. I'll testify to Mr. Fleischman and Ms. Rebel-Allard. No, I'm okay in my current position. Thank you, Congressman. Appreciate that, Director. I wanted to drill down a little bit more. You've been talking about, obviously, the importance of measuring these connections and these touches. 8,800 jurisdictions total. You said you've worked with 1,400. Can you classify the nature of that? Can you tell us a little bit more and drill down? Those 1,400, did they come to you and seek support? Were those ones that you proactively went to? And how would you describe those 1,400 touches? Is there any one area that jumped out more?
It's hard because every state is different. It's hard to really characterize of those 14 what the buckets are. But in some cases, I'll give you an example. There's a state down south that required at the state level all counties to sign up for the election ISAC and sign up for our cyber hygiene scan, that external internet-facing scanning capability. And right off the bat, I got a bunch of my participation level went up. So we are really, we've focused in the run-up to 18 on building relationships and a level of trust and comfort with the state elections because we understand that they have roles of positions of authority in their states. But again, not every state's the same. So we look for opportunities through other one-to-many communities, whether it's advocacy groups or associations of election officials. But sometimes it's really just about getting out there and going to various meetings, not necessarily in the big cities, but sometimes it's getting on a commuter plane and going to county-level meetings.
But can't you, sorry to interrupt, but can't you call the state elections officials in other states and tell them, share that exact story?
We
Hey,
absolutely do,
okay.
but their ability to influence, so in Texas, for instance, it's more of a advice role from the state election director down. And that's just the way elections are run right now. So to us, it's about awareness.
Okay. Is there a type of, well, how do you ensure that those local jurisdictions then follow through? So let's use that as the example, that one that reached out, that had others sign up for hygiene, the checks. How do you ensure that they're using that appropriately, and that isn't just, one person getting the training and then, that person moves on or retires in 2 months? How do you ensure continuity?
So on the hygiene scanning, that's a biweekly
basic,
thing,
yeah.
right? We do it every week. It just kind of rolls through. They get a report. And then from there, it's persistence. It's following through. It's following up with touch points. Say, hey, and we can look at some of these things and say, this one looks particularly concerning. Are you taking care of it? So it's, to a certain extent, it's almost risk scoring what the results that we're getting back are.
As you're doing that analysis and as you're looking and saying, okay, this one looks a little risky, this jurisdiction, these things jump off the page, how many would you classify in a high risk category of they should be contacting you, they should be working with you more, they should be doing things that they aren't doing? What would you call that category, and how many do you think would fall into that?
I don't know if I have a name for it, but what I'm looking at right now, and I mentioned it in the opening, is auditability. So there are 5/6 states right now that are of particular concern because they don't have 5 states entirely don't have voter verifiable paper trails. So South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, New Jersey, and Delaware. Everybody knows this. This isn't classified. They know it. They don't have a paper record. It's all machine based. Pennsylvania has about 83%, I think, of their voting population vote on machines that don't have a paper trail. So those are areas of particular concern. And my primary focus and area of encouragement would be get them off those machines onto something that produces a paper that leads to an auditability outcome. The good news is all 5 of those states and Pennsylvania legislature, I think, passed a bill that said thou shalt do this by the 2020. Those other 5, they're all on the path. They've all either demonstrated through legislative action, through a procurement action, or whatever. They're all moving that way. So we, monitor, engage, continue to help along.
But you would say those 5 deserve a little bit more discussion, help along the way to verify that they're getting there on the from the auditability perspective of paper ballots.
So on the verification side, I'm more thinking about how do we get them there. And that's going to be technical assistance. There's going to be a resource question. Some states may not have budgeted appropriately to get that done, particularly by 2020. So whatever we can do to help them get there is what we're focused on.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Ms. Ming.
Thank you to our chairwoman and ranking member for holding this important hearing. I wanted to ask about STEM education. I'm concerned that our nation's education institutions have not been keeping up with the pace of our growing need for cyber talent. For the past several years, DHS has partnered with the National Integrated Cyber Education Research Center to provide K-12 cybersecurity curricula and hands-on professional development for teachers. I know that the center has been funded through a series of DHS grants since 2012. Last year, it got $21.5 million for a period of 5 years. What metrics does your agency use to assess the effectiveness of this program and other similar DHS-funded programs?
So on the CTAP program, last year I believe it was $4.3 million. We have 12,000 educators in the program across 11 states, and they are able to engage 1.8 million, I think it's 1.8 million students. That is good. That's not good enough. There is a role here for everyone. It's a whole nation effort. So we continue to work with foundations, the private sector, large companies that are invested in ensuring that when they get into hiring actions 15, 20 years from now, that they have a pipeline. So there are a number of efforts afoot right now. There's the National Cyber Education Program that I think is working with Discovery Education. We're looking at ways that we can partner with other efforts, recognizing that Congress doesn't need to be footing this bill entirely. Again, this is a whole of government approach. And I got to say that I am as invested in this. This is probably the thing I'm most passionate about across the portfolio. I have 5 kids in the public that are in or will be in the public education system here in Northern Virginia. And I know what the offerings are right now, and then I have to pay for after-school programs. That's one way to do it. But I think we have to, mainstream STEM education much, much better than we are. And again, there is a role for everyone, not just government, but the private sector as well.
Thank you. And do you think the curricula of this center and this program, or just programs in general, are they preparing them properly to fit the needs of what our country's actual cybersecurity workforce needs? For example, we've heard random stories about what the kids who are studying this curriculum but don't necessarily match the needs of actual programs or what the workforce is in the government, or whatever the needs are, that they don't necessarily match what they're learning. Is that something that you've seen? Or
so I don't believe I've done a specific audit of the curriculum against what the hiring requirements are for the federal government, recognizing that the federal government cybersecurity workforce demands are quite diverse. It's more of a general STEM education base that they can go into any technology field, including cybersecurity. To me, I think there's some sense in making sure that sound development processes are focused on rather than purely on cybersecurity, because there's a certain fatalism associated with, it's always going to be insecure, so we have to have cybersecurity expertise. I want to put a lot more focus into secure by design. That way we don't need to worry so much about the big apps on the cybersecurity side.
And my other question is about shortages of qualified cybersecurity professionals already in the federal workforce. Workforce recruitment and retention has been challenging, especially when competing with the private sector. Cybersecurity professionals in the federal workforce are paid by the GS level system and may be offered a recruitment or retention incentive of up to 25% of their basic pay. But there are still difficulties in staffing. Is CISA looking into maybe a new pay scale for cybersecurity professionals? And are you taking steps to recruit and retain some of these professionals?
So a couple years ago, Congress passed a law that directed us to pull together a program, and we're in the final stages of developing that program. It's called the Cyber Talent Management System. And the point behind the system is that the GS approach the government uses right now for hiring is not tailored to the unique education, certification approaches, processes, whatever, for the cybersecurity workforce. And my the point is, if I have someone that goes to a 2-year college, or maybe no college at all, and yet has demonstrated experience where they may have, they could be incredibly technically proficient at 22, 10 years worth of experience effectively. How do I account for that? Are they a GS4 or a GS11? By the standards that we have in place right now, I can't reward that person and pay them the way they could be paid in the private sector. So it's about balancing the way that we can bring people in. That program, we should be making our first hires under that program this year. We'll have to have a transition between the current system and the new system. But in the meantime, we are looking at what you mentioned, the 25% retention rates. We have a very exciting mission. So it's about making the job that much more exciting for them in the meantime.
Would that apply to returning federal employees too, if they've gone to private and want to come back?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. I look at there's a program called Scholarship for Service, where current college and graduate students. I want to have dedicated pipelines in the nation's colleges and universities of all sizes and stripes, and be able to bring in a steady drumbeat every single year. And if they come in, they work for me for 5 or 6 years, and then go out to the private sector, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because they know who I am and they know how to work with me, and they'll come back.
Thank you. I yield back.
Okay. Mr. Rupersberger?
Chris, I'm glad you're here. I think you're on the right track. I know we met and had a meeting, and I just want to make sure that you have the resources to do the job, because it's a big job, and we have a long way to go. And once we get where we are, we've got to keep innovating. You know that. I'm going to get into the area of trusted internet connections. One area I have a concern with the modernization there. The goal of this program is to consolidate department and agency connections to the internet. And the general theory is that if the federal government has less connections to the internet, then our intrusion detection and prevention capabilities, like Einstein, which helps us to detect and prevent common cyber attacks, will be more effective. Do you agree with that?
In the traditional on-premise environment, yes, sir.
Okay. Now, first, can you give us an update on the TIC modernization, and how many TICs does the government have, and what is your goal?
I'll have to get back to
it's kind of in the weeds, I know.
Well,
I think it's important to get it on the record.
The thing that I was alluding to in my initial response is that in the traditional or historic on-premise environment of having a server room and having a data center where you know where the equipment is, and you can really sit on the pipes and focus them down, TIC was important. Going forward, as particularly we shift through IT modernization to cloud, because cloud is efficient, it's scalable, it's flexible to meet modern workforce demands, TIC won't work, because TIC actually undermines the low latency and high speed and flexibility of the cloud. So what we're doing is shifting to a model and a series of pilots right now where instead of me putting an Einstein sensor in...
Explain to the committee what Einstein is.
Einstein is, well, one of three things. It's an intrusion detection system, so you can kind of see the bad stuff that's coming in and out, and then the intrusion prevention system, which filters email, which if you see the bad traffic, it actually stops it and diverts it to another space. Problem is you have to sit on that pipe to look at the email and how it's in the net flow and the traffic and how it's working. But if it goes to the cloud, the whole point of the cloud is you have this distributed environment with traffic bouncing back and forth. So the alternative model, which in the end will actually be more efficient and save the taxpayer money because we're not owning the infrastructure, we are setting a set of outcomes, security outcomes and requirements for the cloud provider, saying this is the kind of information we need. You guys need to send it back to us, and then we can analyze it. So it's not about putting the equipment out and looking at it as it goes out. It's they've got it. They'll tell us what they're seeing, and then we can alert and act on it.
Counter to the idea of reducing the connections to the internet, the federal workforce is actually moving in the opposite direction, with more and more employees working remotely, which is the future, by the way, and off of cellular devices and tablets. Now, there's a large push in the government to consolidate our cloud infrastructure, as you talked about, to further reduce our attack surface. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. How is CISA adapting its network security strategy to the changing federal workforce, and do you intend to start incorporating more endpoint protection and endpoint detection and response tools to protect the users at the edge of the network? Did you understand what I just said?
Yes, sir. So through the continuous diagnostics and mitigation program that we rolled out a couple years ago, we're going through a capability enhancement, basically a life cycle. We historically called them phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. what we're finding now is that it's better to go through phases based on the capability of the organization. Some agencies are just more sophisticated than others. But to your point, we are really focusing what the next couple of years look like for mobile and for cloud. Some agencies are going to be able to take some of the cloud and mobile capabilities sooner than others. But it's in the CDM life cycle, the phased approach. But as I mentioned, we are ultimately going to shift from a model where we own the infrastructure, we own the sensors, and instead we're putting out a baseline policy and a series of outcomes that we're looking to achieve. And so we have everybody playing by our rules rather than we're doing the operations and maintenance on equipment. And ultimately, I think we're going to be more effective. I think we're going to be able to do it faster. And I think we're going to be able to use the private sector's agility to get those better security outcomes.
And you're going to need more resources and money. So it's so important you maintain this relationship with our
Yes, sir.
committee and our staff so we know where you're going to be next year and the year out, because this is going to get more difficult and it's going to be more needs as we move in the future.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
We've been joined by the chair of the full Appropriations Committee, Ms. Lowy.
Thank you. Don't have my roller skates on, but there are a lot of hearings going on at the same time today.
I'd like to see you in roller skates. That'd be pretty good.
I'll show you pictures of me roller
Okay.
skating. At the age of 8, okay. Excuse me. First of all, I'd like to join my colleagues in welcoming Director Krebs. DHS's Inspector General released a report about the department's efforts to secure our nation's election infrastructure. According to that report, state and local officials' rampant mistrust of federal government assistance critically harmed DHS's ability to secure election infrastructure. I understand that some states are sensitive to what they perceive as federal overreach into their election systems. However, integrity and trust in our election processes are fundamental to our democracy at every level. And I know you faced significant challenges in threading the needle. In 2017, election infrastructure was brought under the government facilities critical infrastructure sector within DHS. I'd be interested to know, how did that move change your relationship with state and local governments?
Ma'am, prior to that designation, that was before I came on board in March of 17. Secretary Johnson made that on January 7th, 2017. Kind of the easy answer is relatively just prior to that designation, there really was no relationship. So it probably got worse as a result of that designation, but there wasn't, much further down to go from there. So what I've focused on since day one of March 2017 is getting us to a place where we have a trusted relationship with local, state and local election officials.
I would also be interested in knowing, how does CISA work with entities like the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the Election Task Force, and others?
So the Multi-State Information Sharing, ISAC, it's based in Albany, New York. It is a organization that we actually fund through a grant or a contract, and they provide resources to state and local governments. A lot of the tools and capabilities, in some cases, that we provide to federal agencies, they are able to provide out to state and locals. The MS ISAC, as we call it, they founded with state and local election officials, the EI ISAC, the election ISAC. So we work with them day in, day out. Throughout the 2018 election, in the run-up, we provided technical alerts, we provided intelligence, we provided basic trend analysis of what was going on out there in the world, and they were able to send to their members. By the election, they had 50 states, all 50 states, and 1,400 election or local jurisdictions participating in the ISAC, which is a historic number relative to any other sector. Now, bad news is there are 8,800 or so jurisdictions, so we still have room to go, but we started from zero, and I think we've made pretty good progress, and we'll continue to focus there for 2020.
That's really impressive. So I just wonder how we can continue to improve these relationships, and how do you address the concerns that the some state and local governments have about working with CISA, like federal overreach? How do you deal with it? How do you build confidence?
You know, it doesn't happen overnight. It's investing a lot of personal time, a lot of miles out there. I spent a good deal of last summer in the run-up, and actually pretty much all of 18 out there on the road, just meeting with secretaries of state, meeting with local officials, to let them know that we're here to help. We're not here to take anything over. We just want to make sure that they're successful in their jobs as election administrators. But really, it's all about trust. It's all about letting them know that we're here to help. And when I get the question of how do you think you did, I sometimes get a little uncomfortable in asking that question and say, particularly if I'm testifying in front of an authorizers panel and I'm next to a state election official, I was like, I don't know, ask him or her. And generally speaking, I think the response has been pretty good across both sides of the aisle. This is not a partisan issue. I take a nonpartisan approach, and I think the proof is in the participation.
And what percent is left that you haven't been able to interact with?
So on the local side, I'm not a math guy, right? But we engaged at this. We've worked with over 1,500 or so. So we got a big number left out there. By my math, 6,300. So we'll get there, and it's just going to take time. It's going to take boots on the ground work. It's going to take advocacy. You all actually have a role as well when you go home, when you go back to your districts. If you can work with your counties, if you can work with your voting jurisdictions, say, hey, are you working with DHS? Are you working with CISA? They're here to help you. They're not taking anything over.
What I wonder about is, with all the talk today, cybersecurity and the past election and who leaked what to who, I don't want to get into that stuff today, but I, who am not an expert in all that stuff, believe me, I just worry who's dreaming up the next challenge for the next election. Do you get into any of that stuff?
Absolutely. That's what keeps me up at night. I know what they did. I know what they did in 16. I know what they tried to do in 18. What are they going to do in 2020? So we've got to make sure that we're covering down on the basics. We've got to make sure that they can't get in through the last approach, and try to be a little creative. The one way that we're going to be able to do this is we have to engage the American public. We have to let them know that there are bad people out there that try to do bad things, but you know what? We've got a system here that works, and we're doing everything we can to protect it. We have to restore faith and confidence in the American people that this is not a system that's about to tip over and fall down, that we're doing the right things, and I think we're going to be successful.
I hope so. I wish you good luck.
Thank you.
But I think those are the questions that really
Yes, ma'am.
keep me up at night, because so many of us were blindsided. We still don't have all the facts, although the facts may be out there, but they're not believed across the board, across parties. And I just think this is so serious. We really have to work in a bipartisan way and figure it out.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it keeps a lot of us up at night.
And spicy Mexican food.
So does Mexican food. Okay. That completes the first round, so we're going to go on to a second round. And I'd like to go back to the federal cybersecurity risks. You talked a little bit about the obstacles that you face in getting ahead of our adversaries. But I would like to ask you are agencies appropriately prioritizing their budget requests to ensure these risks are mitigated? And to the extent that funds are budgeted for this purpose, are they being used effectively? And would more funding help in this effort?
So I do think that with more we can do more, but we have to get back to the question of the basics. We continue to have outdated legacy infrastructure out there. I know at the turn of the changeover in administration, one of the statistics was there's $60 million being spent on federal IT, and about 40 of it was operations and maintenance, and a lot of that is keeping legacy systems up and running. We've got to get out of this model where we're just paying to patch and paying to keep the old stuff running. We've got to modernize, but that's in and of itself not going to fix. I'm excited about the IT modernization efforts because it means we have an opportunity to shift from the security bolt-on mentality where I'm adding security solutions on top, and instead we can design and configure and deploy IT securely. Now, the remaining challenge is that we have at least in the civilian non-DOD, non-intelligence community space, we still have a decentralized model, which means every agency, 99 some odd agencies, every agency is responsible for their own IT and their own security. So what we're focused on right now, working with OMB, is defining what a security baseline looks like for all agencies, centralizing services. Some agencies just can't do the job, so I can help them, do it for them. Identifying and enforcing policy to ensure consistency of approach. Again, the more that we get into a centralized approach, and that's not just on the federal, the executive branch side, but also on the congressional of oversight. There's still decentralized oversight, decentralized budget and appropriations. If we can bring it all together, that's going to make it much easier to manage.
Director Krebs, you mentioned in your testimony under the heading supply chain risks that you are taking steps to secure the actual hardware agencies use to build their networks and the software that runs them. Can you describe what these risks are and where they come from? And have you encountered issues on any federal network resulting from this type of risk?
So this is the emerging issue right now that I've found. It's supply chain risk management. It's really, really hard because of the lack of transparency in whether it's hardware, software, firmware, of the build process. Who is 4, 5, 6 layers down? We have encountered software or supply chain challenges and vendor management challenges over the last couple of years. Congress passed a bill last year on federal supply chain security that set up a Federal Acquisition Supply Chain Council. So thank you for that. It's an important process that is, from our position, will address some of the issues that we experienced during the Kaspersky binding operational directive process. So, yes, we have experienced issues in the federal government. Kaspersky was one of them. We identified it as a threat or as a risk to information security, risk management posture, and we removed it, required the removal from networks, and Congress subsequently mandated by statute. So we are in the early days of figuring out what supply chain risk management looks like for the federal government. We are implementing the legislation, the statute. There'll be a council stood up. DHS will be a key member. We'll look at the standards, the processes. There'll be adjustments to regulations and acquisition processes. But we have tools now that we didn't have this time last year.
Could you just elaborate what kind of damage was done by Kaspersky?
So on Kaspersky, it wasn't that there was necessarily damage. There was the potential for damage, but most importantly, it was an untenable risk position. So the way I look at the Kaspersky issue was that it was an antivirus product which had effectively broad access to equipment below a level against which you monitor. Effective antivirus products bring the information they collect back to a central collection point. It just so happens, in that case, it was in Moscow. And we know that there are a series of laws in Russia, the SORM and other laws, that intelligence and law enforcement services over there can compel access to information. So basically, if you work that chain back, FSB, GRU, whatever, the Russian services potentially had access to civilian networks. Untenable position, rip the equipment out.
Okay. And what tools exist today to help agencies identify the hardware and software they are using that is vulnerable?
So there are a range of both kind of hard tools and soft tools. More, through contracting processes, you can require the prime contractor to identify second, third, fourth tier subcontractors. There are open source tools that can map supply chains and identify where in those where in the process those risks are. Those are the sorts of things that we are looking at, what those tools and capabilities are that we can pull into the Supply Chain Council and issue guidance and issue contracting language, model contract language to departments and agencies.
Okay. I have several other questions, but my time is up. So, Mr. Fleischman?
Thank you again, Madam Chairman. Director Krebs, in your testimony, you referenced initiatives CISA is taking to mitigate supply chain threats as one way of securing our networks and infrastructure. Do these efforts include election equipment?
So we do work with the election community, state and local election officials, the vendor community, the Election Assistance Commission, and NIST to provide threat awareness and security best practices. We do have a pilot program that we're in the initial stages of, as I mentioned earlier, where we're working with a vendor. We're taking their equipment as it's in the development process, and we're basically red teaming it, meaning we are trying to attack that box, we are trying to hack into it, and we then provide the findings back to the vendor and say, here's some of the things you need to work on.
Okay. As a follow-up to that, sir, do you believe the Election Assistance Commission and their partners at NIST have developed voting system guidelines and certification processes that adequately take supply chain risks into account?
So it's kind of a temporal question, but they are in the process right now of developing or receiving comments, on the Voluntary Voter Systems Guide, Voting Systems Guide 2.0. The EAC, that is, just recently reached a quorum where they could issue it. So that process is ongoing right now. So I haven't reviewed the guidance in detail recently, but it's certainly progress.
Thank you, sir. The Help America Vote Act, or HAVA, was enacted in October of 2002, nearly 19 years ago, when the hanging Chad was the greatest threat to our democracy. Fast forward to today, and we are looking at challenges we would never have dreamed of back then. The Election Security Act was included as a separate title of H.R. 1. How much input or communication did the department have in crafting the Election Security Act, and do you feel your concerns were incorporated into the text?
So over the course of the last Congress, we provided technical assistance on a range of election security related legislation, whether it's Election Security Act or the Secure Act. I can't recall the specific name. So over the last Congress, we did provide technical assistance. When I look at Section 3 of H.R. 1, there's a lot of things that we do already in there. We will provide technical assistance to anyone that requests it, whether it's a vendor or a state and local government.
The Election Security Act has a number of new requirements and about 4 new grant programs by our count. One question, do you find your best work with the states comes about because you have collaborative and voluntary relationships?
I think our best work comes from with state and locals. They come because I have a service that they need and they trust.
Very good. I think that about does it. Thank you, Director Krebs. Again, I want to thank you and your department for an outstanding job. Well done, sir.
Mr. Price?
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I want to ask you about the international context of this challenge. Based on press reports and other reports we hear, it's sometimes hard to distinguish what the level of involvement is. I mean, there are disinformation campaigns. There's hacking into the election-related communications, the famous email cases. There is hacking into the actual voting equipment. The countries in which there has been serious interference seem to include, according to reports, Montenegro, Moldova, Ukraine, a number of European situations. I wonder how much do we monitor this? How much do we know about it? How much do we learn from it? This is partly a question about the relationships your agency has with, of course, with the intelligence community, with defense, with state, with other government agencies, and exactly what the division of labor is with respect to international monitoring and international cooperation. It's also a question, though, about how you would assess the state of play here. Do we have the kind of international agreements and understandings we need to monitor what's going on, to understand what's going on, to devise protections in a cooperative way, to have mutual warning systems and so on. So I'm asking you for an assessment of what we know and what we have yet to achieve in terms of understanding and dealing with this internationally.
So I think you laid out the three vectors appropriately, and that's how they're characterizing the intelligence community assessment after the 2016 election. It's the technical hacking of election equipment. It's the disinformation, the campaign to sow discord and divisiveness across the American people, and then the hack and leak campaigns of political operations and campaigns. In terms of the level of, my team leads the domestic efforts of protecting election equipment. The FBI is responsible for the disinformation campaigns, the discord and divisiveness, and countering those efforts. And then there's the hack and leak piece, where we do work we work with political campaigns, particularly the national parties, to help them secure. In fact, just last week, met with a number of folks on that count. Internationally, the intelligence community is all over this. They regularly track these activities. They work closely with their partners overseas. What we are doing within CISA right now is kind of collating our lessons learned from 16 and 18, and then going to our international partners, particularly in Europe, as they're about to face. There are national level votes coming up, and then there are also the European Parliament votes that are coming up in a matter of months. And we are just offering our experience and our findings and saying, these are some of the things that we found useful. We did some kind of innovative things, I think, of working with the media, of raising awareness and education on the things we're doing and where the risk really is.
CISA is engaged in this directly.
Yes, sir.
With international counterparts.
Just last week, out in San Francisco at the RSA conference, I met with probably 30 to 40, I lost count, of my international partners. And the hot topic is election security. So we shared our experiences, the things we found useful. I'm going to send basically a travel team, more sounds like kind of a European vacation for spring break, but over to Europe to share our experience and the best practices and tips that we have.
Do you feel, by virtue of these international contacts and your access, of course, to our other agencies, do you feel like you have a good fix on the full range of techniques and how advanced different classes of actors might be?
I'll admit that part of this experience of engaging with our international partners is there are tools being deployed and techniques being deployed in certain spaces, in the Baltics, for instance, that we haven't seen here yet. So I want to figure out what that is, going to the chairwoman's point of the chairwoman's point of what are you thinking for 2020? What do you think they're going to do? I don't know yet. I haven't seen it yet, but maybe they're using it somewhere else. And if I can go spot it over there, I can get ahead of it here.
Well, that's really why I'm asking. It's clearly relevant.
Yes, sir.
Urgently so, and I would think a bellwether of what we might see here.
Yes, sir.
And you're confident you have those links out.
We're engaged. Yeah, absolutely. I will be spending part of April over in Europe to do just this. We host delegations of international partners virtually every week. Whether it's Europe or Asia Pacific, we are working this every single day and working with our partners every single day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, I want to follow up on this international kind of angle here as well, but switch it over to private industry. You know, the strength of any chain is only as strong as the weakest link. And so what is CISA's relationship with private industry abroad, particularly when we look at issues like China? You know, I'm hearing some of the property theft, as high as, well, I've heard a lot higher than that. I heard $1 trillion. So, you know, who knows what the number is, but it's obviously significant. Can you talk a little bit about what are we doing working with, what is CISA doing working with those private industries to combat these attacks that they're under?
So two ways to address this question. One is what's happening overseas that we may not have seen here yet, and that's, you know, what certain countries may be doing in Ukraine or the Middle East or elsewhere. So we work with our international partners, and we work with their domestic industry to, again, try to get ahead of what the bad guys are doing, and so that we can bring that learning back here and harden our domestic infrastructure. So that's point one. Point two is U.S. companies traveling overseas, engaging overseas. We are working to build awareness and share strategic intelligence. And what I mean by that, I talked about this a lot last week, but China has kind of told us what their areas of interest are. They've set out a plan for strategic sectors of where they want to grow and how they're going to get there. So what we do is we look at those strategic sectors and we engage domestic companies that play in those sectors, and we try to we hope they understand that they're a target. They need to do a little make sure they're taking care of their networks, and we can help them. But their risk level is going to change. So if you play in those sectors, your risks at this level, a 5, we'll say. If you do business with China, a Chinese company or Chinese government, then your risk's a little bit higher, maybe a 7. If you operate in China, your risk is then, quote spinal tap here, your risk is an 11.
Right.
It really does matter where you operate and what space you operate in and how you do business. Do you outsource your services? Again.
So do we have any guidelines for them on or are there any,
does
CISA have any requirements?
Yes, sir. So requirements, no. We're a voluntary organization, but we are in the midst of an awareness campaign. In December 20th last year, the Department of Justice indicted a number of Chinese hackers related to a global hacking campaign. So what we have done is a series of webinars, outreach, engagement, working with our industry partners to help them understand what the Chinese did and some of the things that we can do collectively and individually to protect against those sorts of attacks. This is, I mentioned in my opening, I have 5 strategic priorities for the next 18 months, 2 years, 2 of them federal networks and elections. Number 1, China, supply chain, 5G.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Ruppersberger.
Yeah. I'd like to know your thoughts on how the CISA's successes or failures can be communicated to this subcommittee. Again, because of the preparation is what the tools and things you need. And I know you brought this up in your opening statement. I had to be in another event, so I couldn't be there. But I've always had problems or concern that DHS's cyber mission, and not yours, but just generally is that I don't know how we're doing in this field, and it's evolving. And I think since you've been given your position, it's stabilized to an extent. But I think we have to go a long way as far as educating, this committee. And you have a good team. You have good people. I still don't think you have enough people or resources, but that's another thought. And you've got your budget, and we're going to deal with that. But can you expand upon your risk management, your metrics as far as determining your successes or failures as it relates to where you are, so this committee can deal with that and understand more, other than just showing up for a hearing, ask staff to do the work? Because I'm really concerned. I know that I represent NSA, and I've been dealing with cyber since I've been here in Congress, and I'm really concerned. It's such a major, other than nuclear weapons, it's probably one of the most dangerous threats that we have in the world and in this country too. And we haven't even seen destructive attacks, and that type of thing. So I want to find a way that you can continue to communicate. Let us know where you are. Not because someone from the administration says you got to do this, you got to do that. I mean, this is serious. And I know you have credibility and you want to do what's right. So do you have any ideas on how we can deal with this and what metrics we can use to do it?
So the metrics, all right, distinguish us from NSA because
Totally
this is,
different.
it's not an apples to apples. They have control authorities over the DODN.
They've got the resources. They do it in other area, and they're not yours.
And so we're a voluntary organization for the critical infrastructure community. We do have certain authorities over the federal government, and that includes setting baselines, deploying tools. Congress has helped with that through some of our what's known as the Einstein program, and where we're going to be most successful, whether it's in the federal government or in the critical infrastructure community, is by providing something of value. One of the key areas of focus right now for our continuous diagnostics and mitigation program, we just entered the defend phase. What this really means is we're buying at scale to provide a resource to an agency cheaper than they would be able to get otherwise, whether directly through GSA or effectively on the open market. Einstein 1, Einstein 2. What we do is we aggregate all sources, commercial sources, open source. We bring everything together. Again, no agency would be able to buy every single threat feed out there and bring it all together, clean it up, and package it. It doesn't scale, and it's not the right way to do government. So while we have these tools, these services, these capabilities we're pushing out there, adding it value below the price point somebody would be able to do otherwise, we are also looking at where, from a defense in depth perspective, we can be the most effective. And really, it's things like the patch management binding operational directive 15-01. We said, thou shalt patch, federal agencies, patch critical vulnerabilities at 30 days. What we found is they went from 219 days to about 20. That was purely because of a policy. So I need to be looking in that stack of defense in depth and say, where else can I have a high return on investment that doesn't just saddle a CISO with one more thing that they need to do on a daily basis? And that is really our area of focus right now.
And I think that's laudable, but here's one concern. You have different agencies. Sometimes these agencies have been given independence. They have their tech. Some are not very good, some are better. Now, it seems to me you, as the oversight, need to deal with that. Not only deal with it with the administration, but deal with it with us. Because, if you don't have that the coalescing of everyone together, you're talking about the tools. You're talking about the oversight, but we haven't done what we need to do in .gov. You know that. And it's going to take more than just what you're saying here today. It's going to be Congress working with the administration, and to make sure that if we've got a lousy department because of their boss or because they don't know technology, that we're in trouble. And you talked about the chain, the weakness of the chain.
Yes, sir. We are working with the Office of Management and Budget right now, and Suzanne Kent, the CIO, federal CIO, on establishing a security baseline. And this is what every agency's profile from an outcomes perspective in particular should look like.
And that's really important to me, where they're weak and where we're not.
Yep. And
no,
yes, sir.
You finished?
So as we go through this IT modernization process, as Congress continues to invest in better citizen services, if we hit the baseline, then we're much better off than what we are. And if an agency can't do it, I'm there as a backstop to help them get there.
And you work very closely with the FBI because they have the jurisdiction here too. That's
Yes, sir.
Because they've really improved a lot, I think, from where they started and where they are.
It's a whole of government approach, and I just I didn't think that I would necessarily see this level of cooperation across the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, the law enforcement community.
Leadership at the top.
So we're a lot better than we were certainly 4 or 5 years ago. Just again, I think it's the awareness, the sense of urgency, and the desire to just jump in and try to tackle the problem.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Wasserman-Schultz.
Thank you. Mr. Krebs, thanks for joining us. In your prepared testimony, you stated that one of the highest profile threats we face today is attempts by nation-state actors to maliciously interfere in our democratic elections. You went on to describe the work that CISA did in the lead-up to the 2018 midterms to assist federal partners, state and local election officials, and private sector vendors in better defending their infrastructure from malicious actors. In August, the heads of the national security agencies said that Russia was still trying to influence and disrupt our 2018 midterm elections. Did Russia attempt to interfere in our elections in 2018?
So the department's role here is to assess whether there was a material impact. The secretary, alongside the attorney general, the acting attorney general at the time, issued a statement a month or so ago that said there was no material impact attributed to a nation state on the 2018 election.
The question is, did they attempt to
I'd have to go look back specifically at DNI Coates'.
Material impact is different than an attempt.
Russia is an active player in this space. They continue to try. They will continue to try. I would be disappointed in them if they didn't try again in 2020. They are here to stay.
Okay, so if Vladimir Putin denied that they were attempting to interfere in our elections, would you believe him?
My job is to help state and local election officials
Given
protect their systems.
Given what you just said, if Vladimir Putin denied that Russia is attempting to interfere in our elections, would you believe him?
I base on what I see. We see activity. The intelligence community was very clear in their statement in their report in 2017. Russia, they tried to interfere. Absolutely.
So you would not believe Vladimir Putin if he denied their intentions and their activities?
I believe in the intelligence community. They said he did it. He did it.
Okay. Did any nation state beyond Russia attempt to interfere in our elections in 2018? And did any non-state foreign actors attempt to interfere in our elections in 2018?
So, generally the landscape's pretty active right now. I think in part Russia gave the playbook in 2016. But everybody has a different style and different objectives they want. I describe it this way. Russia is trying to disrupt the system. They're trying to create havoc. They're trying to undermine the American people's confidence in our system of democracy. China, on the other hand, very, very active. I think the FBI director has said that they have active counterintelligence investigations in all 50 states or every field office, whatever their metric is. But they are trying to manipulate the system to their advantage. China is, you're only successful in China if they let you be successful. They're trying to shape global politics in their favor so that they are the
So are they making attempts to interfere in our elections process?
They're absolutely engaging and influencing the political process.
What way is China engaging in that activity?
Well, for one, they, as I mentioned, they're very active in local politics to get local politics, get influence, money into the process. So I'm stepping well out of my area of expertise, but they are active.
So Ms. Yang's potential ties to China could be related to those efforts.
I'm not sure.
The individual who was the owner of the massage parlor in Palm Beach County, where Robert Kraft was and 40 others were caught, and who contributed to President Trump's campaign in the 2016 election.
I would have to defer to the Department of Justice on that one. That's.
Okay. To your knowledge, what methods did nation states and non-state actors deploy in an attempt to interfere in our midterm elections, and were they preventable?
So,
you just described with China, I know I can see the difference between Russia's efforts and China's,
right.
But are the mechanical attempts to interfere preventable?
I'm non-mechanical.
As
You mean like
in-
social media? You're talking about manipulating the
Things
press?
that are not related to influencing the outcome of our elections in our systems and voting processes and the like.
So we are very focused on the technical, tactical, on-network hacking of state and local election officials, and increasingly, particularly as we are in the midst of a presidential cycle, working with political campaigns.
Okay, and just one more question, because I don't know how, I can't see how much time I have left.
About 30 seconds.
Okay. Given President Trump's insistence that Russia did not interfere in the 2016 election, how can we have confidence that this administration is taking the threat seriously and that you have the authority and independence needed to fulfill your responsibilities?
So I've been in meetings with the president when he said he believes the intelligence community report, he has said it publicly, take him at his word. That's what I go on. I operate with the state and local officials below the headlines. That's my job.
And you are given the authority and independence needed to fulfill your responsibilities?
Absolutely. And again, I think the proof is in the pudding. You go ask any state or local election official that's worked with us whether we are of value to them and have been helpful, or we've been in any way restrained. Again, I think the proof is in our performance.
Good to know. Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Mr. Rutherford, you have sure, absolutely.
I want to follow up on Mr. Ruppersberger's question about, you know, what kind of matrices can you provide to us, this committee, so that we see the value and the progression of what you're doing. And I was thinking about these binding operational directives that you guys have the capacity to put out, and agencies, they're binding on these agencies. I think one measurement could be how many of these bots do you put out, and then how well, following up on how well those agencies are responding the way you are asking them to respond. I would be very interested in that kind of measurement going forward. So I appreciate Dutch bringing that up.
So all of the binding operational directives at this point have been publicly posted. I think also the compliance metrics, and we across the board, we have had the kind of the compliance that we would want,
yeah,
right? You know, when we find, let me give you an example. The recent emergency directive, which is the first emergency directive, which is based on an emerging threat and something we were greatly concerned about in January. We asked agencies to do 4 things. One of those things was enable multi-factor authentication, which means harden the security access and authentication measures on the systems that manage the domain name system records. What we found was that some agencies had outsourced the DNS records management to a third party, to a contractor. And when they asked the contractor to enable multi-factor authentication, the contractor said, we can't. We technically can't do it.
Right.
Aha. So this is one of the challenges of contracting and outsourcing processes. There's a push and a pull.
Right.
So what we then do is work with that agency on road mapping how to get to a provider, or maybe this is something that the Department of Homeland Security can do down the road. We can build that infrastructure to provide a DNS management system for the interagency. So these are the sorts of things that we're working through.
That's the kind of thing that I think Dutch was talking about, and I'd like to see, because it shows me the bang for our buck.
Yes, sir.
Going forward.
And we're really in a new phase now, and we're pioneers. 10 years from now, it's going to be a lot different. We've got to stay ahead of the curve and educate, workforce, everything.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Is that the end of the hearing? Well, I do have something that's kind of a joke, but all the matters are over with. Semi. Well, Chris and I gave a cyber speech in Baltimore, so I had my staff ask his staff, is there anything that a joke? And they were a little apprehensive and didn't want to say, hey, don't say it came from us.
I came prepared, don't worry.
But he loves colored socks. What are they today?
So they're a little camo.
Oh yeah, they're conservative.
I was prepared.
Okay, you got it.
I probably should have adjourned
Yeah, I asked the question whether while the business is over. Okay. And I can't tell. I won't tell the staffer who gave me the information.